The storm over the north was not one of rain, but of whispers. At Winterfell's great hall the fire burned high, yet warmth could not touch the cold settling into the bones of every man sworn to House Stark. It was a cold born of treason, or loyalty, depending on who told the tale. Robb Stark, the young wolf, stood tall beside his half-brother Jon Snow. The two were closer than blood ever allowed. Raised together, trained together, brothers in every way that mattered, they now found themselves bound, not just by childhood, but by a cause greater and darker than any they had imagined. Robert Baratheon sat upon the Iron Throne, hailed as the hero who had toppled the Targaryens. But the truth, buried in blood and betrayal, was beginning to claw its way to the surface. The whispers said that Jon Snow was no bastard, no nameless Snow of Winterfell, but the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, Robert's betrothed. The woman he claimed was stolen, the woman he had loved beyond reason. The revelation came not through maesters or bards, but through Ned Stark himself. On his deathbed, weary from wounds taken in the rebellion and bitter with regret, he had summoned his two sons. With a voice ragged from pain, Ned confessed what he had hidden for nearly 2 decades. "Jon," he said, grasping his hand, "you are not my shame. You are my sister's child. You are the blood of dragons and wolves both. Robert would kill you for what you are. Robb, you must guard him, as if he were your own heart." Robb's face had gone pale with the weight of the truth. Jon had stood speechless, unable to breathe as his world cracked apart. A bastard no longer, but a prince, in threat to Robert's crown. When Eddard Stark's eyes closed forever, the brothers were left with his truth and with a choice. Submit to Robert's reign and watch Jon hunted until his head adorned a spike, or defy the king of the 7 kingdoms and risk everything in rebellion. Robb had never been one to hesitate when it came to family. If Robert is a king, then let him be king in the south, he told Jon as they stood beneath the Godswood's ancient heart tree. The north has its own blood, its own kings, and if he dares raise his hand against you, then he raises it against me, against all the north. Jon shook his head, troubled. You would raise banners against Robert Baratheon, the man who sits on the throne with half the realm behind him. The man father followed into war. Robb's jaw clenched, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. Father followed him because he thought it was just. But Robert's justice is nothing but hate dressed as honor. He killed Rhaegar because he loved your mother. He crowned himself king because he lusted for power. And now he would kill you, Jon, my brother, because your very blood mocks his crown. No, if the stag demands war, the wolf will answer. It was then that the choice was sealed. The banners of the direwolf were not yet raised, but the fire had been lit. Word spread in whispers, carried from hearth to hearth across the north. Some lords called it madness. To rebel against Robert was to rebel against the realm itself. Yet others, bound by loyalty to House Stark and bitter at the southern king's neglect, murmured of ancient oaths. The north was once a kingdom, and could be again. In the south, Robert Baratheon heard nothing yet. He drank, he feasted, he hunted, never suspecting that in the frozen halls of Winterfell, 2 brothers had bound themselves in a pact of blood. One was the heir of the north, and the other was the hidden heir of the dragons. Together, they were preparing to defy him, and so the north waited, like a wolf crouched in the snow, ready to spring. But Robert Baratheon was not a man who forgave whispers. When word at last reached him of Jon Snow's true blood, of Robb Stark's defiance, the storm that had long slept in the Baratheon heart would break upon the north with thunder and steel. The raven flew from Winterfell under cloak of night, black wings cutting through the frost-bitten air. It carried a letter whose words could change kingdoms. Maester Luwin, trembling as he pressed the Stark seal into wax, wondered if he had just sent death flying southward. For the truth of Jon Snow's blood was not merely dangerous, it was treason, a spark ready to set fire to Robert Baratheon's fragile peace. By the time the Raven reached King's Landing, the city stank of wine and sweat. Robert Baratheon lounged on his throne of melted swords, a man bloated from excess, his crown hanging crooked upon his head. His laughter shook the hall when he first heard the message. "Lyanna's son," he boomed, veins swelling at his temples. "That whelp Ned paraded about as his bastard? You dare tell me he carries dragon blood?" The council chamber fell silent. Lord Stannis clenched his jaw, eyes sharp as flint. Lord Renly smirked uneasily, while Varys folded his hands and bowed his bald head, careful not to show a hint of reaction. Only Jon Arryn, Hand of the King, spoke cautiously. "Your Grace, the letter bears the Stark seal. It claims that Eddard confessed this truth upon his deathbed, that the boy, Jon Snow, is Rhaegar Targaryen's son, hidden to spare him your wrath." Robert's laughter curdled into a roar. He slammed his cup to the floor, wine splattering like blood. "Ned lied to me. He lied to protect a dragon spawn. A bastard. After all I did for him, after all the blood spilled, and his whelp of a son Robb dares to shelter him." His face grew purple with fury. "I'll gut them both. I'll send my banners north and burn Winterfell to ashes." Varys finally raised his voice, smooth as oil. "Your Grace, forgive my counsel, but if this truth spreads unchecked, it will divide the realm. The small folk still whisper Rhaegar's name with longing. The Lords of Dorne will not forgive the slaughter of Elia and her children. Should they believe a true Targaryen heir lives in the north, rebellion could take root." Robert's eyes narrowed. His hand tightened around the hilt of the warhammer resting beside his throne, as though he could crush ghosts with steel. "Then I'll rip the boy's heart out before he grows wings. He's no heir. He's a corpse waiting to happen." The council dispersed in unease, each man carrying away fragments of Robert's rage. By dawn, ravens flew from the Red Keep to every loyal bannerman. The north harbored a dragon spawn, and the king demanded his head. Back in Winterfell, Robb readied for war. The northern lords had gathered at his call, banners snapping in the icy wind. Some came eagerly, swearing that the north would never bend the knee to a southern king who called for Stark blood. Great Jon Umber slammed his fist on the feast table. "The stag thinks he can command the wolf? Let him try. We'll feed his bones to the crows." But not all voices were so bold. Rose Bolton, pale and calm as ever, raised a hand. "We speak of open war with the Iron Throne. Robert holds the Reach, the Stormlands, the Crownlands, and much of the Riverlands. Even if the Vale wavers, we stand alone. The North bleeds slowly, but it bleeds still. I say we hand the boy over. Let Jon Snow's head buy us peace." Jon stiffened at the words. He had sat silent, cloaked in shadows at the edge of the hall, but his grey eyes blazed. Before Robb could speak, Jon's voice rang across the chamber. "If my death spares the north, I will not hide. Let Robert come for me, and let him swing the hammer himself. But know this, I will not kneel, I will not beg." A hush fell. The lords stared, some with admiration, others with unease. Robb rose, his chair scraping against the stone floor. "No one touches my brother," he said, voice iron. "If Robert sends his armies, we will meet them on the field. We are Starks. The North remembers." The hall thundered with shouts of "The North remembers," even as doubt lingered in some corners. That night, Jon stood with Robb in the Godswood once more, the heart tree watching them with its weeping red eyes. "You should have let me go," Jon murmured. "I'll bring nothing but ruin to Winterfell." Robb turned to him, hand gripping his shoulder with fierce loyalty. "You're my brother. If the crown wants your blood, they'll have to carve it from the North's heart. Let Robert come with all his fury. Wolves don't cower from stags." But in his heart, Robb knew the truth. The stag was already charging northward, antlers lowered, and the wolves would soon feel the weight of its fury. The drums of war began to sound long before the first sword was drawn. Across Westeros, ravens carried the weight of Robert's fury, their wings heavy with demands for loyalty. The king called upon his bannermen, Storm's End, Highgarden, and the Westerlands were to send their might northward to put down what he called a nest of traitors and dragon spawn. At Storm's End, Stannis Baratheon read the command with clenched teeth. He obeyed without question. Loyalty was a chain around his neck, and honor demanded he wear it. Yet in the privacy of his chamber, he muttered to himself, "If the boy is truly Rhaegar's son, then Robert fights not only wolves, but the rightful heir to the throne." He said no more, but the words sat in his chest like a burning coal. Highgarden, Mace Tyrell puffed with pride at the chance to send his banners. "The king commands, and the Reach obeys. We shall show the Starks the strength of summer's bloom." But his mother, the Queen of Thorns, scoffed. "You fool, do you not see? A war in the north will bleed the realm dry, and when men are too busy killing each other, the flowers that bloom last will rule the garden." In Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister read Robert's raven with a smile so thin it could cut. He had bent the knee to Baratheon only when victory was certain. Now, Robert demanded he march his lions into frozen forests to chase wolves. Tywin did not rush. He sent back words of loyalty, but his armies lingered. "Let the stag and the wolf gore each other," Tywin mused. "Then the lion may feast on their carcasses." Yet not all houses bent so easily. In the Vale, young Robin Arryn, under his mother's hand, refused to send men. "The Vale does not spill blood for southern quarrels," Lysa declared, her fear of war outweighing loyalty to Robert. In Dawn, the Martells seethed. News that Lyanna's son lived stoked whispers in Sunspear. Elia Martell's blood cried out for vengeance still. Though they did not yet declare for Jon, neither did they rise for Robert. The realm fractured along quiet lines, even before the first battle was fought. Meanwhile, in the north, Winterfell had become a camp of war. The yards rang with the clash of steel as men trained, and the forges burned without rest, hammering iron into swords, spears, and shields. Robb moved among the men, speaking with lords, listening to their fears, promising them glory. He carried his father's calm, but spoke with the fire of youth, and it stirred their hearts. Jon, though not heir, became a symbol. Men whispered of him as the White Wolf, a bastard no longer but a prince, born of dragon and wolf both. Some feared his name, for Targaryen blood was cursed in the north, but others saw in him the chance to break free from southern kings once and for all. In the great hall, council was held nightly. Great John Umber roared for war, eager to meet Robert in open battle. Galbart Glover counselled caution, urging fortifications and patience. Lady Maege Mormont, stern and unbending, declared her house stood with the Starks to the last breath. And, always, at the far end of the table, Rose Bolton sat silent, pale eyes unblinking, weighing every word like a butcher choosing which cut of meat to carve first. Catelyn Stark's voice was the hardest to bear. She argued not for war, but for peace. "Robb Jon, do you not see what you are inviting? Robert Baratheon crushed Rhaegar at the Trident. He commands lords with 10 times our men. If you rise against him, the North will drown in blood. For, what? For a boy's claim to a throne that does not want him." Her words struck Jon like arrows, but Robb only shook his head. "This is not just about Jon. This is about the North's honor. Father's last words were not meant to be buried in the snow. If Robert thinks he can demand a brother's head, then he has already declared war on us." The council ended with more shouting than agreement, but Robb's decision held. Messengers rode to the castles of the north. Winterfell calls its banners. The king in the south comes for Wolfblood. Far to the south, Robert was already on the move. His fury could not be contained by counsel or caution. He gathered an army vast enough to crush rebellion at its root. Lords of the Stormlands marched under his banner. The banners of the Reach followed, and the Crownlands swelled with men eager to prove their loyalty. The stag thundered northward, leaving behind a trail of dust and steel, And in Winterfell's godswood, Jon knelt before the heart tree, the red leaves drifting around him like bloodied snow. "If I am truly Rhaegar's son," he whispered to the weirwood, "then let me be more than a shadow. Let me be worthy of the blood I bear. For if Robert Baratheon comes to end me, I will not die as a bastard, but as a wolf who fought." The god said nothing. Only the carved face wept red tears as the storm of war crept closer. The first clash came not in the heart of the north, but at its border. Moat Cailin, the fortress of black stone sunk deep into the swamps of the Neck, stood like a scar across the land. For centuries, no army had crossed into the north without bleeding in its shadow. And now, Robert Baratheon's banners, stags, roses, and hammers alike, marched toward it. The southern host was vast, a sea of men stretching to the horizon. The green banners of the Reach rippled beside the golden lions of the Westerlands. Though Tywin's numbers were fewer than Robert expected, the Stormlands provided Robert's heart, thousands of men who beat their shields and shouted his name as if it were thunder. At their head rode Robert himself, warhammer in hand, fury etched into every line of his face. Yet for all his might, the Moat was no easy prey. Robb Stark had fortified it with every man he could spare. The causeways through the swamps were narrow, the towers of the Moat bristling with archers. Behind the walls, northern soldiers waited in grim silence, their faces painted with mud and ash to vanish into the bogs. Jon rode with Robb to the front lines. The sight of Robert's banners struck him like a blow. To think, this man had loved his mother once. This man had fought his father, and now he came to kill him. Robb's voice cut through Jon's thoughts. "This is no battle we can win by numbers. We will bleed them, make them fear every step into the north. The swamps will fight with us." When Robert's vanguard advanced, the Neck swallowed them whole. Archers hidden in reeds loosed arrows that found gaps in armor. Men stumbled into pits of water and spikes, dragged down screaming. Direwolf banners howled above the fortress as northern horns echoed through the mists. For 3 days, Robert's host battered at the Moat. His warhammer broke through shield lines, his roars shaking the air as he waded into the fight himself. Yet for every yard gained, the swamps reclaimed 2 more. The southerners cursed the mud, their heavy armor dragging them to watery graves. On the 4th day, Robert stood before his generals, face dark with rage. "If we waste ourselves in this bog, we'll hand victory to wolves before we see Winterfell's walls. We march around, let the Neck rot with Starks. We'll take the eastern road and cut through the Vale, or the western road through the Twins." Stannis, stern and unbending, protested. "To leave the Moat unconquered is folly. An enemy at your back will bleed you with raids." But Robert slammed his warhammer into the map table, splitting the wood. "I'll not drown my men in mud. We go west. Walder Frey will open the Twins, or I'll hang his brood from the bridge myself." And so the host shifted, trudging westward, leaving the Moat undefeated but isolated. The northern men cheered as they watched the stag banners vanish into the distance, but Robb's face remained grim. "They'll be at the Twins in weeks," he muttered, "and when Frey smells which side might win, he'll sell us all." In Winterfell, the news of the Moat's stand brought hope, but also urgency. The North could not win by defense alone. Robb sent riders to the mountain clans, calling their axes to war. Jon rode among the Karstarks, urging loyalty, though some lords eyed him with suspicion. "Dragon spawn," one muttered behind his back. "Will he burn us all like his kin?" Still, Jon's quiet strength began to win hearts. When he sparred in the yard, men saw not a pampered prince, but a warrior who bled beside them. When he spoke, his words carried the stark steadiness, though shadowed with fire not unlike Rhaegar's. Slowly, grudgingly, the North began to see him not as a bastard nor as a dragon, but as a wolf. Catelyn remained unconvinced. In the solitude of her chamber, she prayed to the Seven that her son's pride would not doom them all. She had lost her husband. She could not bear to lose her sons to a war she deemed folly. Yet Robb's eyes, hard and unyielding, were too much like Ned's for her words to sway him. As Robert marched, rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the North sought to crown Robb as king. Others whispered that Jon Snow, the hidden Targaryen heir, meant to claim the Iron Throne itself. In taverns and keeps, men argued which wolf they followed, and far away in King's Landing, Queen Cersei Lannister listened to the tales with narrowed eyes. "A Targaryen in the North," she murmured to Jaime. "If Robert fails, this boy may yet rise. Dragons return when least expected." Her smile was cold. "Perhaps it is time the lions played their own game." The stag thundered toward the twins, the wolf howled in the snow, and the lion crouched in silence. Westeros was being pulled apart one heartbeat at a time. The twins loomed over the green fork, their towers grey and crooked, like two watchful eyes set upon the river. No host could march into the north without passing beneath their bridges, and no host could pass without bending to the will of House Frey. Walder. Frey, old and spiteful, sat hunched upon his chair in the great hall, his brood swarming about him like flies on a corpse. When word came that Robert Baratheon himself approached with an army vast enough to choke the earth, Walder smirked, his yellowed teeth flashing. The stag comes with iron and thunder. The wolf waits with snow and shadows. Both want the bridge. Both will pay for it. Robert entered the hall in fury rather than patience. His armor was caked in mud, his beard thick with sweat, his eyes burning like a storm. He threw down his gauntlet on the table, the sound echoing like a war drum. "Open your bridge, Frey, or I'll hang your carcass from it." Walder, sly as a rat, bowed but not too low. "Of course, Your Grace, of course. The twins are yours." But his watery eyes flickered. "Such a crossing deserves recognition. My house is loyal, aye, but loyalty must be rewarded. Marriage ties, perhaps, or lands in the north when this rebellion is crushed." Robert's temper flared. "You dare bargain with me? Do you think me a beggar at your gates? I am your king." But Frey did not flinch. He had weathered insults all his life, and he knew Robert needed his bridge more than he needed Robert's favor. "A king you are," Walder rasped, "and yet no king marches without roads. Grant me my due, and the bridge is yours. Refuse, and you may try your luck fording the river with an army that drowns in mud." Stannis urged Robert to cut the old man down and seize the bridge by force, but Renly laughed and whispered otherwise. "Better to humor him, brother. Even a dog has teeth when guarding a gate." So Robert, swallowing his pride, promised rewards. 2 of his knights would wed Frey. Daughters and lands in the Riverlands would be granted once victory was his. The twins opened, and the southern host thundered across, their banners darkening the sky. News of Robert's crossing struck Winterfell like a blow. Robb gathered his council, the direwolf banners draped heavy behind him. "We cannot let Robert march unchallenged. If he takes the Riverlands, he'll cut us off from allies and choke us in our own snow." Jon leaned over the map, his eyes tracing the lines of rivers and hills. "The Freys will not hold him. They've already chosen the stag. But Walder Frey is no man of loyalty. If he sells his bridge to Robert, he may sell it again to us. Wolves must be cleverer than stags." Great John Umber pounded his fist on the table. "Bah! I say we meet Robert head-on. Let him taste the bite of northern steel." Rose Bolton's soft voice slithered through the chamber. "Head-on! We are crushed. Numbers are not ours, but 1,000 cuts can bring down a giant. Let Robert bleed for every mile he marches. Let the Riverlands burn about him until his men starve on ashes." The lords shouted back and forth, but Robb silenced them with raised hand. "We will not be rash. If Robert takes the Riverlands, we'll meet him there. I'll send riders to River Run. The Tullys are our kin. They must choose whether to stand with wolves or with stags." Catelyn's face paled at the mention of her family. My brother Edmure is brave, but the Riverlands are weak. If Robert's full host descends, Riverrun cannot stand alone. You'll drag my kin into ruin." Jon looked at her, voice steady, but edged with steel. "Lady Catelyn, Robert has already dragged them into ruin. Whether they choose or not, his army will march through their fields. Better they stand as wolves than kneel as prey." The room fell into uneasy silence. That night, Jon walked alone upon Winterfell's battlements, the cold wind biting at his face. Ghost padded at his side, red eyes gleaming in the dark. Jon felt the weight of his blood more than ever. He was no longer just the bastard of Winterfell. He was the key to a war tearing Westeros apart. And though Robb spoke with certainty, Jon knew every step Robert took northward brought doom closer to their gates. Far to the south, Robert's army feasted. At the Twins, the halls shook with drunken songs, the air thick with roasted meat and spilled ale. Robert drank deep, boasting of how he would crush the wolves beneath his hammer. Yet in a quiet corner, Lord Renly whispered to Sir Loras Tyrell, "If Robert falls, who will rise, the wolf pup or the dragon bastard? Perhaps this war has more crowns to offer than one." And in Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister received word that Robert had crossed the Twins. He smiled faintly, his golden fingers tapping the table. "Good. Let Robert bleed himself on stark steel. When the wolf and stag are broken, the lion will feast." The Game of Thrones was deepening, and Jon Snow felt its claws tightening around him. The Riverlands burned first. Robert's army poured south of the Twins like a flood of steel, and the small folk were the first to drown. Villages were stripped bare, barns emptied, fields trampled by thousands of boots. Smoke choked the skies as houses burned, and the cries of women and children echoed long after the soldiers marched on. Robert did not command it. He was no Tywin Lannister, but war was war, and men grew savage when they hungered and marched. Too long. When word of the pillaging reached Riverrun, Edmure Tully slammed his fist against the walls of the great hall. "The Starks warned us, and I hesitated. My people starve, my villages are ash, and Robert Baratheon calls it victory." Lord Hoster Tully, old and weakened by illness, rasped from his bed. "Then do not hesitate again. If the North calls, the Riverlands must answer. Raise the Tully banners. Send word to Winterfell. We are wolves as much as trout now." And so the sigil of the leaping trout flew beside the dire wolf. The Riverlands bent their knee to Robb and Jon, not Robert. When the news reached Winterfell, Robb wasted no time. "We march south. The Riverlands cannot hold alone. If Robert burns them, he will break their will before we can unite." The northern host gathered at Moat Cailin, thousands of men hardened by snow and sworn to the wolf. Jon rode at Robb's side, Ghost padding silently through the ranks. Among the soldiers, songs began. Songs of the White Wolf, the dragon-blooded Stark who defied the crown. Some sang with pride, others with unease, but the name spread like wildfire through the camp. Jon felt the weight of it each night as he lay awake, staring at the stars. He was not bred to lead armies, yet men now whispered his name as though it belonged to destiny. He wondered if this was what his father, his true father, had felt when marching toward the Trident. The first clash came at a river crossing near Fairmarket. Robert's vanguard, led by Lord Randyll Tarly of the Reach, sought to secure the bridge. But when the Southerners marched, they found wolves waiting. Robb had studied the maps with Jon, listening to every counsel. "We strike fast, then fade, let them believe us weak, then bleed them again tomorrow." Northern archers lay hidden in the trees. When Tarly's men crossed the bridge, arrows darkened the sky. The first ranks fell screaming into the river. Then northern riders burst from the woods, howling with fury, their axes flashing. The battle was short and brutal. By nightfall the bridge was slick with blood, and Tarly's forces had broken, fleeing south. It was a victory, but not without a cost. Hundreds of northerners lay dead, and the cries of widows filled the camp that night. Jon walked among the wounded, binding what wounds he could, speaking softly to the dying. Men looked at him with awe, as if his touch carried more than comfort, as if wolf and dragon both lived in his voice. When Robb joined him, he said quietly, "They'll remember this night, Jon. Not just the battle, but you. You give them hope." Jon shook his head. "I give them nothing but more blood to spill. Robert will not stop for one defeat. He'll come with fire and fury." And Jon was right. Days later, Robert himself led the charge at Stony Sept, hammer in hand, his voice like thunder. The northerners fought like wolves cornered, but Robert was a storm. No man stood before his warhammer and lived. He smashed through shield walls, broke riders from their saddles, and left a trail of ruin in his wake. Robb and Jon watched from the hilltop as Robert's fury scattered their flank. Robb's face was tight, his hand white. On the hilt of his sword, he fights like 10 men. No wonder the Targaryens fell before him. Jon's chest burned with something colder than fear, an understanding that this was not just war, but fate. Robert Baratheon had killed Rhaegar Targaryen, his father. Now Robert marched to kill him. The wheel had turned full circle, and blood demanded blood. By nightfall, the battle ended without true victory for either side. The northerners retreated deeper into the Riverlands, bleeding but unbroken. Robert held the field, but not the North's submission. The war stretched on, each side waiting for the other to break. Back at River Run, the northern host licked its wounds. Lords argued once more, voices sharp with fear and pride. Some urged retreat to Winterfell, others pressed for another strike. Jon sat silent, his thoughts heavy with ghosts. Catelyn's voice rose above the rest. "This war will tear us apart. Already the Riverlands bleed. The North bleeds. You cannot match Robert's strength." She turned her gaze on Jon, sharp as a blade. "And all for what? For you, for a boy with dragon blood who brings nothing but ruin." Jon met her eyes, steady but pained. "I never asked for this war, my lady, but Robert brings it all the same. If he would see me dead, let me face him myself. Let him and I settle this, one hammer against one sword. Why should thousands die for our quarrel?" The hall erupted in protest, some crying folly, others daring to hope. Robb, however, did not waver. He placed a hand on Jon's shoulder and spoke with fire. "If Robert wants your head, then he must cut through all of us to take it. This is no quarrel of 2 men. This is the fate of the North, and the wolves do not bow." Jon said nothing, but in his heart he wondered how many more wolves would die before the storm broke. The summer rains fell hard upon the Riverlands, turning fields into mud and roads into rivers of filth. Men drowned in their armor without a blade ever touching them. Carts of grain sank into the muck, and disease began to gnaw at the edges of both armies. War, as always, cared little for glory. Robert Baratheon's host pressed northward still, though slower, his fury undimmed. His bannermen quarrelled constantly, their tempers as worn as their boots. The Reach lords chafed at the long marches, the Stormlanders snarled at delays, and the Crownlands muttered that the Riverlands' suffering was proof of the Starks' treachery. Yet all bent when Robert roared. His warhammer was command enough. In River Run's war hall, Robb and Jon studied the map by candlelight. The River Lords had pledged fully now, their banners swelling the northern host. But the truth was grim. Robert still outnumbered them nearly 2-1. "We cannot meet him." "In open ground again," Robb said, tracing the rivers with his finger. "At Stony Sept he broke us with his own strength. We need the land itself to fight for us. Here, at the Red Fork, the river runs deep and swift. If we draw him into crossing, we can strike while his host is divided." Jon nodded, but his voice was distant. "Every plan we make delays the same truth. He will not stop until either he lies dead or I do. And I wonder, Robb, which fate the gods prefer." Robb's eyes hardened. Enough! You are my brother, not some pawn of fate. If Robert seeks your blood, he'll choke on it. Jon did not argue, but when he walked later among the campfires, he heard the whispers. Some soldiers spoke his name, with reverence, calling him the White Wolf, the true heir who would avenge Rhaegar. Others spat it like a curse, muttering that dragon blood would doom them all. Jon bore it in silence, though the weight pressed on him heavier than any armor. That night a raven came from the Vale. Though Lysa Arryn refused to march, word had reached the mountain clans of the Falcons. Hardy men of the high peaks, they sent a message. The Wolf's war is just. We marched to join you. It was not an army, but hundreds of fierce warriors who owed nothing to lords, only to honor. Their arrival stirred the camp, proof that not all hearts bent to Robert's crown. But the greater shock came when riders from Dawn appeared at Riverlands' gates. Their banners of sun and spear glimmered beneath the rain. They brought no army, but a message from Prince Doran Martell. Dawn does not march for Robert. Dawn remembers Elia, and Dawn remembers Rhaegar's son. The words spread like fire. For the first time, Jon's claim felt real, not just whispers, but a banner others might rally beneath. Robb saw it in his men's eyes, the question of whether this war was for the North's freedom or for Jon Snow's crown. Jon himself wrestled with it in silence. That night, he knelt once more beneath Riverlands' weirwood, the red leaves, dripping rain like blood. If I am meant to rule, give me strength. If I am meant to die, give me courage. The tree gave no answer, only the endless weeping of its carved face. The storm broke days later at the Red Fork. Robert's host, driven by hunger and rage, attempted the crossing. The river swelled high, currents dragging men and horses alike. Yet Robert pressed them forward, his warhammer raised, his voice thunder. On the far bank, Robb gave the order. Northern archers loosed volleys into the river, cutting down men as they struggled through the current. Hidden pikes thrust up from beneath the shallows, skewering riders before they reached the shore. The water turned red with blood, but Robert himself forced the crossing, his warhammer smashing shields aside as though they were twigs. Men followed where he led, dragged by the sheer gravity of his will. Soon the banks boiled with battle, and the wolves and stags tore into each other with steel and fury. Jon fought beside Robb, Longclaw flashing silver in the rain. Ghost leapt through the chaos, tearing throats and sowing terror. For hours, the brothers carved their way through the melee until the field stank of mud and blood. And then Jon saw him, Robert Baratheon, taller than any man, his hammer drenched red, his face twisted with wrath. Their eyes met across the carnage, and in that heartbeat Jon knew this was the storm he had been born into. His father had fallen to this man, his mother had been loved and lost to him, and now Robert came for him, the boy who carried both their blood. Robb's voice cut through the chaos. "Jon, stay close!" But Jon's feet carried him forward step by step toward the stag who had shaped his life from the shadows. The storm and the wolf were about to meet. The battlefield at the Red Fork had become a graveyard. Rain fell heavy, mixing blood with mud until the earth itself seemed to bleed. The screams of the dying echoed across the riverbanks, but neither side broke. Wolves and stags tore at one, another, desperate, unyielding. And at the heart of it, Jon Snow faced Robert Baratheon. Robert's warhammer swung in great arcs, each blow a storm unto itself. Jon barely raised Longclaw in time, the Valyrian steel ringing as sparks flew. The impact sent him reeling, his arms shuddering from the force. Robert bellowed, a sound closer to thunder than a man's voice. "Dragon spawn, bastard! I ended your father, and I'll end you!" Jon's breath tore in his chest, but he steadied his stance. "You loved my mother once. Does her son deserve only your hate?" For the briefest heartbeat, Robert's eyes flickered, not with doubt, but with deeper rage. "Lyanna died because of your father, because of his lies, his songs, his silver tongue. I lost her, and all that's left is you, his whelp. I'll smash you like I smashed him." The hammer came down again, shattering earth where Jon had stood. Jon darted aside, his blade flashing. Longclaw cut across Robert's pauldron, steel biting into flesh. Robert roared, but the wound only seemed to stoke his fury. The duel became the storm's eye. Men on both sides stopped to watch as wolf and stag clashed. Each strike of hammer against sword echoed like a drum of war, each breath a battle cry. Robb saw it from across the melee and fought desperately to reach his brother, his own sword cutting a path through the chaos. Jon fought with every ounce of skill drilled into him at Winterfell, every lesson Sir Roderick had beaten into his bones. But Robert was a force of nature, a man made for war. His strength was a tide that no blade could hold forever. At last, Robert struck with a blow so fierce it tore Longclaw from Jon's grip, sending the sword spinning into the mud. Jon stumbled, breathless, as Robert loomed over him, hammer raised. "High die, bastard!" Robert roared. But before the hammer could fall, Robb Stark slammed into the king with the fury of a wolf protecting its pack. His sword scraped across Robert's breastplate, forcing him back a step. "You'll not touch my brother!" Robb snarled. Robert staggered, then swung his hammer wide. It smashed into Robb's shield, splintering wood and hurling him to the ground. Robb gasped, dazed, his sword slipping from his fingers. Robert raised the hammer again, his face twisted with the promise of death. Jon lunged. In the mud, his hand found Longclaw once more. With a cry torn from his soul, he drove the Valyrian steel upward. The blade pierced beneath Robert's ribs, sliding deep into his chest. For a moment time stopped. Robert's hammer slipped from his grip, crashing into the mud with a hollow thud. His eyes, wide with shock, locked onto Jon's. Blood bubbled at his lips as he staggered, his massive frame shuddering. "Lyanna," he rasped, voice breaking like a man's final prayer. Then the storm broke. Robert Baratheon, king of the 7 kingdoms, fell to his knees and toppled into the mud, the life fleeing from him. Silence rippled across the battlefield. Stags cried out in horror, wolves in disbelief. The usurper was dead, slain not by a rebellion or an army, but by the hand of the boy whose blood he had sworn to destroy. Jon stood trembling, Longclaw slick with blood, his breath ragged. Robb rose unsteadily beside him, gripping his shoulder. "It's done. Gods help us, Jon, it's done." But it was not done. Robert's death shattered the realm in an instant. His bannermen screamed for vengeance, others faltered in terror. Some fled, others fought on blindly. The battle dissolved into chaos, as if the death of the storm had broken the world's order. By nightfall, the wolves held the field. The stag. Banners were torn, their armies scattered. Robert lay in the mud where he had fallen, his body already cold. Yet victory tasted of ash. Thousands lay dead, and the realm itself teetered on the edge of ruin. At Riverrun, the northern lords hailed. Robb as king in the north, their voices echoing through the halls. But their eyes often turned to Jon. To some, he was a savior, the boy who had slain the usurper. To others, he was a curse, a dragon's heir, whose very existence had plunged the realm into blood. Catelyn's face was pale as she looked at him. "You've killed a king, Jon, and in doing so, you've made yourself one. Whether you wish it or not, the realm will never let you go." Jon said nothing. He stood at the window, staring northward, where snow fell silently over fields that had yet to see war. His heart ached for Winterfell, for the quiet days when he had been only a bastard boy with no crown, no destiny, no blood feud. But that boy was gone. In his place stood Jon Snow, the White Wolf, the dragon's heir who had slain the stag. And though the war had ended at the Red Fork, he knew in his bones it was only the beginning.